The year was 1873, and the wind that blew across the New Mexico territory carried the dry breath of the desert and the sound of a deal no heart should ever have to make. The sky was wide, endless, the color of tarnished brass, and under it, the Hart Ranch lay weary as its owner. Fences sagged, cattle numbers had dwindled, and the land itself seemed to whisper defeat. Inside the creaking farmhouse, Evelyn Hart, barely 19, stood in the doorway of her father's study, her small hands clutched in the folds of her faded calico dress. Her father, Thomas Hart, sat at his desk, his broad shoulders bent like an old mule's under too much weight. The smell of whiskey and worry hung in the air. Across from him stood a man of quiet dignity, tall, dark-haired, wrapped in a worn buckskin shirt and moccasins. His face was marked by sun and silence. This was Kohana, an Apache from a nearby band who lived between two worlds, tolerated by neither. Evelyn had heard his name whispered before in town. Some called him the poor Apache. Others said he'd been cast out by his own people for refusing to fight. The truth was more complicated, but truth in the frontier often mattered less than rumor. Her father's voice broke the still air. "You'll have my daughter," he said roughly, not meeting her eyes. "In exchange, your people will leave my cattle be." "I can't fight no more," the words hit Evelyn like a bullet. For a heartbeat she thought she'd misheard, but the Apache didn't flinch. He simply inclined his head, eyes steady, unreadable. "You trade your daughter for peace?" he asked quietly. His English was slow, deliberate, touched by the rhythm of another tongue. Thomas Hart's jaw clenched. "I trade what's left of my life for what's left of hers. If this land burns, she dies anyway." Evelyn wanted to scream. She wanted to beg him to take it back. But her father's eyes were hollow, the eyes of a man who'd already buried hope along with his wife. The drought had taken the crops. The raids had taken the cattle. Now despair was taking his soul. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Pa, you can't." "I can," he said. Then softer, "Girl, I have to." Kohana turned to her. His gaze was not cruel. It was deep, solemn, the eyes of someone who carried too many ghosts. He bowed slightly. "You will be safe," he said simply. "Safe." The word felt like an insult. The wedding took place that same evening, before the sun dipped behind the sandstone ridges. There were no flowers, no church bells. Only the raw orange light of the dying day, the hum of cicadas, and the low murmur of the preacher who looked too nervous to meet either of their eyes. Evelyn wore her mother's faded white shawl, the one thing she had left that felt like love. Her hair hung loose, copper-brown and tangled from the wind. Kohana stood before her with quiet strength, his features carved by years of hardship. When the preacher asked if she took this man, her throat locked. She wanted to say no, to run, to curse them all for forcing her into this fate. But then she saw her father standing off to the side, hat in hand, eyes glistening with guilt. She realized there was no choice left. "I do," she whispered. Kohana said the same, his voice low as thunder rolling far away. The sun slid below the horizon, and the deal was sealed. The frontier folks who'd come to witness it muttered to themselves as they drifted away. Some shook their heads in disgust, others in pity. A white girl and an Apache. It was a union the law didn't even recognize. To most, she was now a woman ruined. That night, Kohana rode with her through the gathering dusk, toward the small hut he'd built near the edge of the reservation. The land stretched endless around them, hard, untamed, a sea of sage and shadow. Evelyn's heart pounded so loud she thought he could hear it. She had imagined savagery, imagined being taken against her will. Every story she'd heard painted his kind as beasts, but he rode silently, keeping distance, his back straight, his posture calm. When she stumbled as she dismounted, he reached out instinctively, catching her by the elbow, then let go just as quickly, as though afraid to startle her. "Inside," he said quietly, gesturing toward the hut. The place was small, built of adobe and logs, a single room with a low fire flickering in a stone pit. It smelled of smoke and sagebrush. A few handmade tools hung on the wall, a simple blanket laid over a bed of furs. Evelyn stood near the door, her pulse racing. She had no weapon, no plan. The silence was thick. She heard the fire crackle, the coyotes calling somewhere far away. Kohana crouched by the fire, stirring the coals. He took out a small carved figure from a pouch, a tiny dove of bleached bone, and set it between them on the ground. "It means peace," he said, glancing up. "You sleep." I will keep watch. Evelyn blinked, not believing him. You're not going to? He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw the sadness in his eyes. I take nothing not freely given, he said. The words stunned her. She could only nod, her voice lost. He moved toward the doorway, bow in hand, settling himself outside in the cool desert night. Evelyn lay down on the blanket, every muscle tense, waiting for something. For him to change his mind, for danger to strike, for morning to come. But the hours passed quietly. The only sounds were the whispering wind and the distant cry of an owl. She caught glimpses of his silhouette through the crack in the door, tall, watchful, patient. When dawn came, she found him still there, eyes half closed. A man who'd kept his word. For the first time, she wondered if she'd been wrong, not just about him, but about everything she'd been taught. In the following days, she saw how he lived, carefully, respectfully, every movement guided by purpose. He hunted only what he needed, shared his food with the old, and spoke to the land like it was alive. Still, she fought her resentment. She didn't want to admire him. She didn't want to see the goodness that lingered quietly beneath his silence, but it was there, undeniable. One evening, when the light turned honey gold and the desert sang with crickets, she caught him watching her. Not as a man watches a woman he owns, but as a man sees something fragile he doesn't wish to break. And in that gaze, something inside her shifted, a flicker, a tiny fracture in the walls she'd built. She turned away quickly, pretending to busy herself with the fire. Yet she couldn't stop hearing his words from that first night. I take nothing not freely given. Those words would haunt her, comfort her, and in time change the course of her heart. The bargain her father had made was one no woman wanted. But as the days stretched on, Evelyn began to suspect that fate, cruel as it seemed, had handed her not punishment, but a strange and dangerous kind of mercy. And though she didn't yet know it, the man she'd been bartered to, the poor Apache whom the world called savage, would be the one to show her what love meant when stripped of all pretense and pride. The nights in the desert were cruelly cold, colder perhaps than Evelyn ever imagined. By day the land shimmered under the relentless sun, but once darkness fell, it turned into a sea of silence and frost. The small adobe hut that Kahana called home barely held the warmth from the dying fire, and Evelyn, wrapped in a thin blanket, shivered as she lay awake on her side of the room. She could hear him outside again. He always stayed near the door, sitting cross-legged with his bow across his knees, the soft scrape of flint or the creak of leather, the only proof that he was awake. She had asked him once why he didn't sleep. He'd said simply, "It is not a night to rest when a stranger shares your fire." That word, stranger, stuck in her chest like a splinter. She had been his wife for 3 nights now, yet every hour seemed to draw a deeper line between them. He spoke to her only when necessary, never raised his voice, never touched her. It was not the life she'd feared. It was stranger still. A marriage without violence, without passion, without warmth. The 4th night, she broke first. "You don't even look at me," she said suddenly, her voice trembling with more than cold. Kahana lifted his eyes slowly from the fire. The glow lit his features, deepening the planes of his face. "You do not want to be looked at by me," he said quietly. "That's not true," she said, though she wasn't sure herself. "You married me. I'm here. Don't treat me like a ghost." He studied her a long moment. Then he rose, his movement graceful and quiet, and crossed to the small carved dove that lay between their sleeping places. He picked it up, turning it once in his hand. "This means peace," he said again, as if reminding himself as much as her. "It is what I promised you. My people's ways. They are not the same as yours. When I marry a woman, I do not own her. I stand beside her. But if her heart is closed, she walks her own path until it opens." Evelyn's throat tightened. "And if it never opens?" He looked toward the window where the moonlight washed pale over the dry hills. "Then I will still guard her," he said. For a long moment silence hung between them, broken only by the low hiss of the coals. Something inside her cracked, not entirely in sorrow but in confusion, curiosity, a quiet awe she could not explain. The next morning, when the sun broke over the ridge, she saw him kneeling by a small clay bowl outside the hut, grinding maize with rhythmic patience. He moved with a calm that seemed impossible in such a harsh land. She watched from the doorway, unseen. Over the next days, she followed him more, from a distance at first. She saw how he gathered herbs, stopping often to touch the leaves, murmuring words in his native tongue. He carved tools, fetched water, mended a torn strap of her father's old saddle without being asked. When he hunted, he took only one deer, no more. When he killed, he whispered thanks to the land and left an offering of cornmeal by the blood. It unsettled her, this reverence. The world she'd known was one of taking, of pushing the land until it bled. Yet here was a man whom her people called savage, treating the earth like a mother. That night, when he returned with meat for their supper, she found herself speaking softly. "You don't kill more than you need." "Why?" He looked up from cleaning the blade. "Because hunger is never ended by greed," he said. His words lingered long after he finished eating. A week passed, then 2. Evelyn began helping him with the chores, fetching water, patching hides, gathering firewood. The work was hard, but her hands grew stronger, her spirit strangely lighter. At dusk, when they sat near the fire, she began to ask about his people. He told her of the Chiricahua, of how they once roamed from the mountains to the river valleys, free as the eagles. He spoke of songs sung to the sun, of dances meant to bring rain. He told her of how his brother had been killed in a raid years ago, and how vengeance had burned in his heart until he learned that hate only chained the soul. "You've lost so much," she whispered once. "How can you still be so gentle?" He smiled faintly, his dark eyes soft in the firelight. "Because everything harsh teaches gentleness, if you survive it." That night, something in her began to thaw. But the world outside their small hut did not rest easy. Rumors spread across the nearby settlement that Evelyn Hart had gone wild, that she lived as the wife of a savage, that her father had traded her for cattle and shame. When she rode into town once for salt and thread, the air grew cold the moment she stepped off the horse. A woman she had known since childhood spat on the ground near her boots. A storekeeper pretended not to see her. 2 men on the porch of the saloon laughed loud enough for her to hear. She left with her chin high, heart pounding. But that night, back in the safety of the adobe walls, she could no longer hold her tears. "They say I'm ruined," she whispered when Kohana found her sitting by the fire, her shawl clutched tight. "That I'm a fool, a disgrace, that you—" Her voice broke. He crouched beside her, silent, then slowly placed his hand over his own heart. "Only you can ruin your spirit," he said softly. "And I see yours is strong." Evelyn stared at him through her tears. His hand did not touch her, yet she felt the warmth of it deep inside. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not her father, not any man in town, not even the preachers who preached of grace. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking of his eyes, of the stillness that surrounded him. Just before dawn, when the stars were paling, she rose and stepped outside. He was there again, seated against the doorpost, awake as always. "You don't have to keep watch every night," she said softly. He turned his head. "It is habit." She hesitated, then added, "You could come inside. It's cold." He didn't answer right away. Then with quiet steps, he followed her in. The fire burned low. For a moment they stood facing each other, the space between them charged with something she couldn't name. She could feel her heart beating in her throat. All the fear, all the confusion, melted into one aching need. Not for possession, not even for desire, but for understanding. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His fingers were warm, calloused, trembling slightly. "Why are you kind to me?" she whispered. "Because kindness is not weakness," he said, "and because the world gives too much cruelty." She didn't know who moved first, but suddenly his forehead rested against hers, and the breath between them mingled. He did not kiss her. He only stood there still and patient, as if waiting for her permission. And in that stillness she realized he was breaking every rule the frontier had made about men and women, about conqueror and conquered. He was breaking them simply by being gentle. When she finally lifted her face, their lips met. Soft, uncertain, then deepening with a warmth that spread through her entire body. It wasn't passion born of desperation. It was something purer, older, sacred as the land itself. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and sage. The desert, vast and merciless, seemed to hush, as if bearing witness to a union the world would never understand. When morning came, he was still beside her. No words were spoken. There was no need. That night, and the ones that followed, would be remembered by Evelyn for the rest of her days, not as the moment she surrendered, but as the moment she awoke. The desert changed as spring ripened into summer. The rains came late that year, and when they came, they fell like a miracle, soaking the cracked earth, painting the canyons in sudden green. For the first time since her wedding, Evelyn laughed freely beneath the open sky, her skirts plastered with dust and water, her hair tangled from the wind. Kohana watched her from where he stood near the corral, his hands resting on the fence rail. He didn't speak. He rarely did when she was happy. It was as though her laughter alone was enough. By now, their life had found rhythm, rough, honest, and strangely peaceful. Each dawn began with the sound of the rooster crowing and the smell of smoke from the small hearth. Evelyn had learned to grind maize on a stone slab, to tan hides, to ride bareback with her knees gripping the flanks of a Mustang she'd named Dust Devil. Kohana worked the land, patient as ever. He built her a larger garden patch along the river's edge, where corn and beans grew strong. Sometimes they rode together in silence, the only sound the creak of saddle leather and the far-off cry of a hawk. It wasn't the kind of marriage she'd imagined as a girl. No parlor dances, no fancy dresses, no piano music drifting through an evening breeze. Instead, it was simple things. His quiet strength beside her, the way his hand brushed hers when they passed a bowl, the silent smile he gave when she managed to start a fire in one strike of flint. One evening, after a long day of labor, they sat together watching the sun slip behind the ridges. The light poured over them in molten gold, and Evelyn found herself studying the scars on his arms, white lines that crossed the bronze of his skin like old roads. "How did you get those?" she asked softly. He hesitated, turning his wrist slowly. "Some from battle, some from hunger, some from men who thought I was less than them." Her chest tightened. "I'm sorry." Kohana shook his head. "The land does not owe me comfort. It gives what it gives, and I still breathe. That is enough." But Evelyn couldn't let it rest. She wanted to reach out and trace those scars to honor them somehow. The marks of survival, of endurance. She didn't, not yet. Instead, she said, "I used to think strength was just fighting back. Now I think maybe it's something quieter." He smiled faintly, a flicker of warmth in his dark eyes. "Then you are learning the way of the desert." That night, after supper, she found herself lying awake again, staring at the ceiling. His words lingered, filling the still air. She turned toward him. He was lying beside her, one arm beneath his head, eyes closed. The moonlight cut across his face, softening the edges of his features. He looked peaceful, yet there was always something held back, a distance she couldn't yet cross. Quietly, she reached over and brushed her fingers against his hand. He opened his eyes immediately, meeting her gaze. "I just wanted to know you were real," she whispered, embarrassed. He chuckled softly, the sound low and rare. "I am real, wife." The word wife sent a flutter through her stomach. She smiled in the dark, but beyond their small patch of peace, the world was changing, Mike, and not kindly. The frontier was swelling with settlers. The railroad had begun cutting its silver line through Apache lands. With it came soldiers, merchants, miners, and greed. Whenever Evelyn rode into town now, the stares grew sharper. The whispers turned into insults. "Half-breed's whore," "Apache's woman." Once a man spit near her boots. Another called out, "He'll scalp you when he's done with you." She tried to ignore them, but it wore at her. The old guilt and fear crept back. When she returned home that evening, her face pale and trembling, Kohana noticed instantly. "Who hurt you?" he asked. "No one touched me," she said quickly. "Just words." He nodded slowly, understanding too well. "Words are knives," he said, "but they cut deepest only if you hold them." Evelyn looked at him, tears threatening. "How do you bear it? Always being hated?" Kohana's gaze turned to the horizon, where the mountains glowed like dying embers. "A man is not what others call him," he said. "A man is what he does when no one sees." It was such a simple truth, yet it steadied her heart. That night she knelt beside him as he carved a new wooden figure, a wolf this time, its body caught mid-leap. His hands were steady, his knife gliding over the grain as though the spirit of the animal was trapped inside, waiting to be freed. "Why do you carve?" she asked. He looked up at her. "To remember. Every creature, every moment has a spirit. If we do not honor them, they fade." She thought about that, how his people remembered what the world tried to erase. How love to him was not just a feeling, but an act of remembering, of seeing. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his cheek. He froze, knife stilling mid-stroke. Then he set it aside carefully and turned toward her. The silence between them was thick as honey, and the fire painted their faces in amber light. She could see the pulse in his throat, the steady rise and fall of his chest. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she whispered. He brushed a hand over her hair, slow and gentle. "Then don't." And when he kissed her, it was not with the urgency of a man claiming his right, but with the reverence of someone discovering grace. His lips were warm, his touch sure but patient, as though he knew she needed time to trust what she felt. Outside, the desert wind sang through the brush. Inside, the world seemed to hold its breath. That night, they became one, not through the fire of lust, but through the quiet merging of two souls long denied peace. When dawn came, Evelyn lay with her head against his chest, listening to the slow beat of his heart. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest she'd ever known. They worked side by side, laughed over small mistakes, shared stories in two languages. He taught her the Apache word for love, ayo aniinishni. She repeated it until he smiled. But the desert, as Kohana always said, did not let any joy go untested. One morning as they gathered corn, a rider appeared from the direction of town, a messenger dust-covered and grim-faced. He handed Evelyn a note written in her father's rough hand. Her breath caught as she read, "Evie, come quick. They're talking of driving the Apaches off the land. There's talk of blood. Don't come alone." Kohana read her expression before she could speak. "Your father?" he asked. She nodded. "He's in trouble. The settlers, and they're planning something." He stood silently for a moment, his jaw tight. Then he said, "If there is trouble, they will not listen to me." "I can make them listen," she said fiercely. His eyes softened, but his voice was grave. "You cannot stop a storm with words." "Then I'll stand in the rain," she said. He smiled faintly, proud, sad. "You are more Apache than you know." That night they sat together beneath the open sky, the fire burning low. The stars stretched endlessly above, bright as silver coins scattered by the gods. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. "When this is over, when they finally see you as I do," he interrupted softly, "they may never see me as you do. But if you see, that is enough." And when she looked up at him, she realized what love meant in the harsh sun of the frontier. It wasn't about peace or comfort. It was about choosing each other every day in a world determined to pull them apart. He had taught her how to live with strength, with tenderness. She had taught him how to hope again. Together they were something the land had never seen, the heart of the wild and the courage to love it back. The summer heat lay heavy over the San Pedro Valley, thick as smoke. The wind had gone strange, restless, charged with that uneasy stillness that comes before a storm. Even the horses stamped nervously at their posts, as if they too could sense that the air itself had turned dangerous. Evelyn woke before dawn to the sound of hoofbeats. Not the steady rhythm of Kohana's riding, but the sharp, hurried pounding of more, too many. She sat upright, heart hammering. By the time she reached the doorway, Kohana was already outside, bow in hand, his body still but alert. Riders were coming down the ridge, Soldiers, their uniforms dusted red by the road, rifles glinting in the morning sun. The flag of the U.S. cavalry fluttered above them, its colors harsh against the sky. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. "Kohana," he held up a hand for silence. "Stay inside." The soldiers fanned out, horses snorting, boots grinding against the dry earth. At their head rode a man with a bristled mustache and a face hard as iron, Captain Reynolds. He was known in town, a man of rigid rules and colder mercy. "You there," he barked, pointing at Kohana. "Step away from the woman." Kohana didn't move. His voice was steady. "This is my wife." The captain's expression twisted. "You mean your prisoner? We've had reports of stolen rifles and raids near the river. Apache tracks lead this way." "No one has raided here," Evelyn said, stepping forward before Kohana could stop her. "He's innocent. He's done nothing but live peacefully." Reynolds's eyes flicked toward her, full of disdain. "You're Evelyn Hart, aren't you? The one who married the savage." He spat the word like poison. "You're as much to blame. Harboring an Indian outside reservation limits is a federal crime." Evelyn's breath caught. "He's my husband," the captain sneered. "You're his accomplice. Tie him up." The soldiers moved quickly, spreading in a half circle. Kohana didn't reach for his bow. He knew too well what would happen if he did. They grabbed his arms, yanked him to the ground, bound his wrists with rough rope. Evelyn lunged forward, screaming, "Stop it, he's done nothing." Reynolds ignored her. "We'll hang him at Fort Lowell at sunrise. Let the people see what happens when an Apache plays at being civilized." "No." Evelyn's voice broke. She struggled against the soldiers' grip as they pushed her back. Kohana, on his knees in the dust, looked up at her. Calm, heartbreakingly calm. "Evie," he said softly, "don't fight them. I can't just watch." He smiled faintly, though blood ran from the corner of his lip. "You must. The land remembers truth, even when men forget." Those words shattered her. They dragged him toward their horses, tying the rope to a saddle horn. Reynolds turned to her. "Be grateful we don't charge you too. You've been warned." The troop rode off, dust swallowing them whole. Evelyn stood frozen, the wind whipping her hair, tears cutting lines through the dirt on her face. Then something inside her snapped. She went inside, grabbed Kohana's hunting rifle and a pouch of bullets and mounted her mare. Her heart pounded not with fear but with a ferocity she'd never known. She was done being the woman who waited, who obeyed. By the time she reached the old cottonwood grove near the creek, she caught sight of them again. The soldiers camped for the night before their long ride to the fort. Kohana was tied to a post near the fire, guarded by two men who laughed as they played cards. She dismounted quietly, hiding in the shadows. Her mind raced. She could shoot, but there were too many. She needed another way. The younger guard stood and walked toward the horses, whistling. Evelyn crept forward, her breath shallow. The moonlight glinted on her rifle barrel. But before she could move, a voice cut through the darkness. "Evelyn." Kohana's, he'd seen her. His eyes caught hers, calm again, even now. "Go," he mouthed. She shook her head, tears spilling down. Then one of the guards noticed the movement. "Hey, what the hell?" A gunshot split the air. Evelyn fired without thinking. The young soldier dropped, clutching his shoulder. The others shouted, scrambling for weapons. She ran forward, screaming Kohana's name. Chaos erupted. The second guard grabbed her, wrenching the rifle from her hands. Kohana surged up, slamming his shoulder into the man, sending him sprawling. For a heartbeat, they were both free. Then Reynolds appeared from the tent, revolver drawn. "Enough!" he roared. He leveled the gun at Kohana. "One more move and I'll—" "Shoot me then," Evelyn cried, stepping in front of Kohana. "If you kill him, you'll kill me too." The world went still. The soldiers froze, their captain's finger hovering on the trigger. Evelyn's voice trembled, but it rang clear. "He never harmed anyone. You talk about law, but where's the law in hanging an innocent man? Where's the honor in killing someone because he's not like you?" Reynolds's jaw worked. He'd expected pleading, not defiance. She pressed on, her chest heaving. You call him savage, but he's the only man on this cursed frontier who's ever shown me gentleness. You take his life, and you prove that it's you, not him, who's uncivilized. One of the younger soldiers shifted uneasily. Captain, he muttered. Maybe we oughta... Quiet, Reynolds snapped. But his grip wavered. Kahana stood behind her, bound, his eyes never leaving her face. Pride, love, and sorrow all mingled there. He whispered, Evie, enough. No, she said fiercely. Not until they know who you are. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then slowly, Reynolds lowered his revolver. His mouth twisted in disgust. Cut him loose. We're done here. The younger man obeyed, slicing through the ropes. Reynolds glared at Evelyn. You've made your choice, Mrs. Hart. I hope you can live with it. Don't expect protection from the law, or from anyone decent. With that, he turned his horse and rode off, the others following. Their dust trailed long into the dawn. When the last hoofbeat faded, Evelyn turned to Kahana. His wrists were raw and bleeding, but his eyes shone, proud, tender, unbroken. She fell against him, sobbing. I thought I'd lost you. He held her close, his hands trembling as they tangled in her hair. You found me, he said softly, even when the world tried to take me away. They stood there until the sun rose, painting the horizon in crimson and gold, the color of blood and fire and rebirth. That night, back at their small hut, Evelyn washed his wounds and laid the carved bone dove between them once more. Peace, she murmured. That's what you said it meant. He smiled faintly. And now it means love that survived the wind. Outside, the coyotes called to the stars, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, the storm breaking at last. They slept in each other's arms, hearts steady, knowing that though the world would never accept them, the desert itself, vast and eternal, had witnessed their truth. For in that moment, they had done what no law, no army, no fear could undo. They had chosen love in the face of hate, and in doing so they had written their names into the wind. The years that followed moved like the slow current of the San Pedro River, steady, filled with both silence and song. The world beyond their valley changed. Railroads carved through mountains, soldiers built new outposts, settlers staked fresh claims. But for Evelyn and Kahana, life remained measured by simpler truths. The ripening of corn, the rhythm of rain on clay roofs, the laughter that echoed inside their small adobe home. Each dawn found Kahana at work among the crops, his bronze skin glistening in the pale sun, and Evelyn beside him, her skirts brushing the soil she had once feared. She no longer looked like the trembling bride who'd been forced to marry an Apache warrior. Her hands were rough now, her back strong, her gaze calm as a hawk's. But she still wore the small carved bone dove around her neck, its surface smooth from years of touch, its meaning deepened by everything they had survived. In the nearby town, whispers still followed her name. The white woman who lived with the savage. The girl who turned her back on her own kind. But time, as it always does, dulled the cruelty of gossip. The ones who sneered eventually aged, died, or left. The frontier forgot. Yet legends have a way of remembering what history tries to bury. One autumn evening, the sky burned with a copper sunset. Evelyn sat outside their home, weaving a blanket dyed in red and white threads. Colors, Kahana said, represented the flame and the dove. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and rain. Kahana was riding back from trading with a nearby rancher, and she listened for the familiar drumming of his horse's hooves. But when the sound finally came, it was wrong, hurried, uneven. Her heart clenched. The rider who appeared in the fading light wasn't Kahana. It was Micah, a boy from the ranch, his face streaked with dust and fear. Mrs. Hart, he shouted, leaping from his horse. There's been a fight, over by the river crossing. Some men from town tried to rob your husband. He fought them off, but they shot him. Evelyn didn't wait to hear more. She was already on her horse, the wind tearing at her hair as she rode hard toward the river. Her vision blurred, her breath burned. She prayed, to God, to the wind, to the desert spirits Kahana believed in. For one more moment, one more heartbeat. She found him near the water, slumped against a rock, his shirt dark with blood. His horse grazed nearby, untethered, its reins dragging. "Kohana," she cried, sliding from her saddle. She fell to her knees beside him, gathering his face in her trembling hands. He opened his eyes, faint but still full of that familiar light. "Evie, don't you dare," she choked. "Don't you dare leave me now." He smiled faintly. "You always were fire." Tears streamed down her face. "I can't do this without you." "Yes, you can," he whispered. His hand found hers, pressing something small and cool into her palm. The bone dove, its string broken, soaked with blood. "You keep this, tell them. Love is stronger than the border between worlds. Please," she begged, shaking her head. "We'll get you home. But he silenced her with a touch, his fingers tracing her cheek. "You gave me a home the day you said my name without fear." The wind swept across the river then, lifting her hair, carrying the faint cry of a coyote, as if the earth itself mourned. Kohana's eyes softened, the fire in them fading to embers. His last breath left him like a sigh into her hands. Evelyn held him for a long time, her tears falling on his face, her sobs swallowed by the empty desert. The river moved on, untroubled, endless. That night, under a sky blazing with stars, she built a fire beside the place where he had fallen. She wrapped him in the blanket she had woven, the red and white one, and laid the dove upon his chest. No priest came. No words of the church were spoken, yet it felt sacred, older than any scripture. She whispered the prayers Kohana had taught her, calling on the spirits of earth, wind, and sky. Then as dawn broke, she watched the flames consume what was mortal, leaving only ash, bone, and memory. When she finally returned home, she was no longer the same. Grief did not make her smaller, it made her vast. She carried Kahana's spirit in her every step, hearing his voice in the whisper of leaves, in the hush before rain. Years passed. The town forgot her again. Children grew up hearing rumors of a white woman who lived alone in the desert, who spoke to the wind and healed the wounded travelers who passed her way. Some said she was mad, others said she was blessed, and yet every spring, when the doves returned to nest in the cliffs above the San Pedro, a small fire could be seen burning near her hut, steady, gentle, never dying. One evening, a writer and a young journalist from Tucson stopped there seeking water. He found her on the porch, older now, her hair silver, her eyes still the color of storms. She gave him a drink and listened as he spoke of the world beyond, the cities, the telegraph, the new trains. When he asked about the carved dove hanging from her neck, she smiled faintly. "It's a love story," she said, "one that broke every rule of the frontier." He asked if it was true. She looked toward the hills where the wind always seemed to sing. True enough that the land remembers. Before he left, he promised to tell her story, to write it down so it would not fade with the dust. She simply nodded. After he rode away, she sat in the twilight and watched the fire burn low. A dove called from the cottonwoods. The horizon blushed with evening flame. That night, when the stars came out, the desert wind stirred gently through the valley. It was said that travelers passing by could hear faint laughter in the breeze, the laughter of a woman and a man, woven together like two spirits that the world could not divide. The locals began to call it the legend of the dove and the flame. They said if you ever find yourself lost in the San Pedro Valley, and a storm rises from the west, you should follow the sound of doves. There, in the last light before dusk, you might see two figures standing on the ridge. A woman with hair like moonlight and a tall Apache beside her, his hand in hers. Some say it's just the wind carving shapes into the dust. Others swear they've seen it with their own eyes. But one thing all agree on: when the doves return each spring, and the wind carries the scent of mesquite and rain, love walks the frontier again. The kind of love that breaks rules, defies empires, and burns brighter than the fires that built the West. Because once, long ago, a poor Apache and a 19-year-old settler girl found each other in a world set against them, and together, they changed the very soul of the desert.